Roosevelt, Astor, Forbes, Yale, Harvard. You know these names. What you don't know, they all got rich the exact same way. Flooding China with opium, thousands of tons, millions addicted, 400% profit, and then they spent 200 years making sure you'd never find out. Until now. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president on Mount Rushmore, the man who saved America from the Great Depression. His family fortune came from selling drugs, hard drugs, opium, millions of addicts, millions dead. And the Roosevelts got rich. Very rich. And they weren't alone. The Astors, the wealthiest family in America, drug money. Forbes magazine built on opium profits. Yale's Skull and Bones funded by drug smugglers. Harvard buildings paid for with Chinese opium silver. Some of the most powerful families in American history. The institutions that educate our leaders. The dynasties that still run this country. All of it was built by flooding China with drugs. Industrial scale. Thousands of tons. 400% profit margins. And then they buried the evidence, rewrote the history books, built libraries and museums with the blood money, and made sure you'd never find out until now. Because the shipping records exist, the letters survive. The account books are in archives. And what they reveal is that America's aristocracy, the families we're taught to respect, made their fortunes doing exactly what we imprison people for today. Except they did it to an entire country. Poisoned millions, destroyed the Chinese economy, and got so rich they could erase it from history. This is the story they don't want you to know. The drug dealers who became American royalty, and how they got away with it for 200 years. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 32nd President of the United States, led America through the Great Depression and World War II. His face is on Mount Rushmore alongside Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. An American hero. But here's what they don't teach you in school. The fortune that funded FDR's privileged upbringing, his education at Harvard, his entry into politics, all of it came from drug money. His grandfather Warren Delano II made millions smuggling opium into China. Millions of Chinese became addicted. Millions died. And the Delano family got rich, very rich. And they weren't alone. The Astors, the richest family in America in the 1800s, opium money. The Forbes family. Yes, that Forbes built their publishing empire on opium profits. The Perkins family funded Yale University with opium money. The Cabot family, Boston Brahmins, opium traders. The Russell family founded Skull and Bones at Yale University. Opium smugglers. Some of the most powerful, most respected, most influential families in American history built their fortunes selling drugs. Not just participating, but dominating. American companies controlled 10% of the opium trade into China by the 1830s. We're talking tons of opium, hundreds of millions of dollars, an entire generation of Chinese destroyed by addiction, and American families got so rich they founded universities, museums, and political dynasties that still run the country today. This is the story no one tells. How America's elite families made their fortunes in the opium trade, how they whitewashed that history, and how the same families that got rich selling drugs then spent a century criminalizing drugs for everyone else. The hypocrisy is staggering, and the proof is undeniable. Before we go through the families, you need to understand what the opium trade actually was. Not the sanitized museum version, the reality. In the early 1800s, Britain had a problem. They were buying massive amounts of tea silk and porcelain from China. But China didn't want anything Britain produced. So Britain was paying in silver, draining their reserves. They needed something to sell to China. Something Chinese people would buy in massive quantities. They found it. Opium grown in British-controlled India, refined into smokable form, and smuggled into China where it was illegal. The Chinese government had banned opium. They knew it was poison. But British and American traders didn't care. The profit margins were 400–500%. You could buy opium in India for $100, smuggle it into China, and sell it for $500–600. Risk was high. Chinese authorities would execute smugglers if caught, but the profits were worth it. And American families wanted in because American ships were faster than British ships. Clipper ships built for speed, perfect for outrunning Chinese naval patrols and delivering opium to secret coastal locations. American captains would sail to British India, load up with thousands of pounds of opium sail to the Chinese coast, and wait offshore at designated anchorage points. Chinese smugglers would row out in small boats, take the opium pay in silver. The American ships never technically entered Chinese ports. Plausible deniability. And the silver flowed back to America, tons of it. This went on for decades, 1800s to 1840s, before the Opium Wars. Then continued after millions of Chinese became addicted. The Chinese economy was devastated. Silver was flowing out of China into British and American coffers. And in America, the families getting rich from this used the money to build legitimate empires. Let's look at who they were. Let's start with the most famous, the Delanos FDR's family. Warren Delano II was born in 1809 in Massachusetts. At 19 years old, he went to China to work for a trading company. By age 24, he was a partner in Russell and Company, the largest American opium trading firm in China. Russell and Company wasn't just participating in the opium trade. They dominated American involvement. They had offices in Canton, Guangzhou. They had clippers ships. They had connections with British opium growers in India. And they made millions. Warren Delano ran the operation from 1833 to 1846. 13 years of opium smuggling. He returned to America. A very wealthy man. How wealthy? Rich enough to build a 40-room mansion in Newburgh, New York. Rich enough to send his children to the best schools. Rich enough that when he lost money in the Panic of 1857, he could go back to China, make another fortune in opium, and return even wealthier. His daughter Sarah Delano married James Roosevelt. Their son was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR grew up in wealth, private tutors, Harvard political connections, all funded by opium money. And here's the kicker. In 1935, while FDR was president, he signed the first federal laws strictly controlling drugs, the Marijuana Tax Act, a precursor and expansion of narcotic controls. The man whose family fortune came from selling drugs to Chinese people spent his presidency criminalizing drugs for Americans. The irony is thick. Now, let's look at the Astors. John Jacob Astor, at one point the richest man in America. His wealth built the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, funded libraries, created a dynasty. Where did the money come from? Furs. Right. That's the story. He traded furs. True, but that's not where the real money came from. Opium. John Jacob Astor's ships sailed to China starting in 1800. His ship, the Macedonian, made regular opium runs. Astor didn't just trade furs for Chinese goods. He traded Turkish opium for Chinese silver, then used that silver to buy furs, tea, and silk. The opium trade was the profitable leg that made everything else work. By 1840, Astor was worth $20 million. That's $500 million in today's money, most of it from opium profits. His great-grandson, John Jacob Astor IV, died on the Titanic as one of the richest men in the world. That wealth built on opium. The Astor family name is on libraries, museums, university buildings, all of it funded by drug money from China. The Forbes family. Yes, that Forbes. Malcolm Forbes, the magazine publisher billionaire. His family fortune started in China. The Forbes family of Boston sent ships to China in the early 1800s. Robert Bennett Forbes and his brother John Murray Forbes were major opium traders. They worked with Russell and Company, the same firm Warren Delano worked for. Robert Forbes captained clipper ships that carried opium. John Forbes invested the profits into railroads and became one of the wealthiest men in Boston. Their descendants used that wealth to start Forbes magazine. The family became American aristocracy, and it all started with opium. John Murray Forbes is celebrated in Boston as a great businessman and philanthropist. There are statues of him, buildings named after him. No one mentions the opium. It's been scrubbed from the official history. The Perkins family. Thomas Handacid Perkins. T.H. Perkins, as he was known in Boston. One of the wealthiest men in New England in the 1800s, funded hospitals, asylums, schools. How did he make his money? Opium. Perkins was a founding partner of Perkins and Company, which later merged with Russell and Company. He ran opium from Turkey and India to China for decades, made millions, then retired to Boston and became a respected philanthropist. Yale University's Perkins Fellowship named after the family, funded by opium money. The Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, opium money. Thomas Perkins is remembered as a great man. The opium part is not mentioned at all. The Russell family. Samuel Russell founded Russell and Company in 1823. It became the dominant American opium trading firm in China. Russell made an enormous fortune, retired to Connecticut, and in 1832, his cousin William Huntington Russell co-founded Skull and Bones at Yale University. Skull and Bones, the secret society that has produced presidents, Supreme Court justices, CIA directors, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, John Kerry, all bonesmen. The Russell family fortune that helped establish Yale's most powerful secret society came from opium. Samuel Russell's money also helped fund the Russell Trust, which still funds Skull and Bones operations today. The most powerful secret society in America was built on Chinese opium money. The Cabot family, Boston Brahmins, old money respected. Their wealth came from trading with China in the early 1800s. Guess what they traded? Opium. The Cabot family name is everywhere in Boston. Cabot House at Harvard. Streets named Cabot. But the opium connection is never mentioned. The Lowe family. Abbott Lowe, another prominent opium trader, ran clipper ships to China, made millions. His son Seth Lowe became president of Columbia University and mayor of New York City. The family donated money to build Lowe Memorial Library at Columbia. Opium money built an Ivy League library. Here's the pattern. American families go to China in the early 1800s. They work for opium trading firms or start their own. They make enormous fortunes smuggling opium. They return to America. They invest in railroads, real estate, and legitimate businesses. They become respectable. They fund universities, museums, libraries, and hospitals. They erase the opium connection from their family histories. Their descendants become American aristocracy, and no one talks about where the money came from. This wasn't small scale. By the 1830s, American firms controlled about 10% of the opium flowing into China. British firms controlled most of the rest, but Americans were significant players. Russell and Company alone shipped thousands of chests of opium annually. Each chest contained about 140 pounds, thousands of pounds of opium. Year after year, the scale was industrial, and the profits were massive. A single successful opium voyage could return 400 to 500% profit. Ship captains and company owners became millionaires. In 1830s money, that's a multimillionaire or billionaire level today. And this continued for decades. Even after the Opium Wars, which China fought specifically to stop the opium trade, American firms kept smuggling. They just got better at hiding it. Let's talk about what this opium did to China. By the 1830s, an estimated 10 to 12 million Chinese were addicted to opium. about 10% of the adult male population. The addiction was so widespread it crippled the Chinese economy. Silver that should have stayed in China was flowing out to pay for opium. The Chinese government tried to stop it. They appointed Commissioner Lin Zexu to end the trade. In 1839, Lin confiscated and destroyed 1,000 tons of British opium in Canton. Britain's response war. The First Opium War, 1839–1842. Britain won forced China to sign the Treaty of Nanjing. China had to pay reparations open ports to British trade and cede Hong Kong. The treaty didn't explicitly legalize opium, but it made enforcement impossible, so the opium trade expanded. American firms benefited enormously because during the war, British firms couldn't operate. American firms like Russell and Company took over their business. After the war, both British and American opium smuggling resumed at even higher levels. The Second Opium War, 1856–1860, happened for the same reason. China tried to stop the trade. Britain and France went to war, forced China to legalize opium and open more ports. American firms again profited during and after the war. The human cost in China was catastrophic. Millions addicted families destroyed, the economy wrecked. But in Boston, New York, and Connecticut, American families were building mansions and founding universities. Here's the most infuriating part. The same families that made fortunes selling opium then turned around and criminalized drugs for everyone else. In the early 1900s, America led the international movement to ban opium. The Hague Opium Convention of 1912, the Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914. America pushed global drug prohibition. Why? Because by then, American elites had already made their money. Chinese immigration to America meant opium dens were opening in American cities. The elites didn't want competition. They didn't want American workers getting addicted like Chinese workers had. And they certainly didn't want anyone pointing out that their own fortunes came from the drug trade. So they criminalized it, painted opium users as criminals and degenerates, and buried the history of how their own families had mass-marketed the same drug to China. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose grandfather made millions in opium, signed some of the toughest drug laws in American history. The families that got rich from drugs spent the 20th century prosecuting and imprisoning people for drugs. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. And here's what makes it even worse. The history has been whitewashed. Most Americans have no idea that the Delano, Astor, Forbes, Perkins, Russell, and Cabot families made their fortunes in opium. Go to the FDR Presidential Library. The Delano family's opium connection is mentioned in one small exhibit downplayed as Trade with China. Go to the Astor family history. Opium is barely mentioned. It's all about furs and real estate. The Forbes family history. They talk about railroads and magazines, not opium. Yale University mentions Samuel Russell as a benefactor. The opium business that funded him is not mentioned. Harvard's Cabot House named after the Cabot family. Their opium trading is not in the official history. For 2 centuries, the truth has slept beneath marble and ivy. Behind the libraries, the universities, the portraits on museum walls lies a forgotten origin. The Delanos, the Astors, the Forbes, the Perkins, the Russells, the Cabots, the Lows, the families that shaped America's elite. Their fortunes were not born from innovation or invention. They were built on opium smoke. In the early 1800s, American merchants followed Britain's path to China. They saw a market not for tea or silk, but for addiction. Opium grown in India processed for profit and smuggled into Chinese ports under the cover of darkness. The trade was illegal. The profits unthinkable. 400% returns. One voyage could make a man wealthy for life. And those men became legends. Warren Delano II. Grandfather of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, worked for Russell and Company, the largest American opium trader in China. For 13 years, he managed shipments, bribes, and sales. He returned to America rich enough to build estates fund education and marry into the Roosevelt line. His grandson would become president, the same president who later signed laws criminalizing drugs in America. The circle of irony is complete. John Jacob Astor, the fur trader we celebrate in textbooks, earned his fortune the same way. His ships carried Turkish opium to the Chinese coast. He sold poison for silver, and that silver built mansions and hotels. By 1840, Astor was the richest man in America. His name still crowns the Waldorf Astoria, a monument built on smoke and suffering. The Forbes brothers Robert and John Murray sailed the same routes. They filled their holds with opium and returned with silver silk and power. The profits built railroads, funded investments, and decades later created Forbes magazine, an empire of ink born from opium dust. The Perkins family, honored in Boston as philanthropists, made millions from the same trade. Their company merged into Russell and Company, the heart of the American opium network. Hospitals, schools, and even the Perkins School for the Blind were financed by opium wealth. Today, their name is carved in stone, but not their deeds. The Russells, too. Samuel Russell founded Russell and Company in 1823. His cousin William Huntington Russell co-founded Skull and Bones at Yale, a secret society that would later shape generations of American power. Presidents, senators, CIA directors, all tracing lineage to a fortune built on the suffering of China. The Cabots and the Lows, Boston families of respect and heritage, traded the same cargo. They financed ships, employed captains, and used the profits to endow universities. Cabot House at Harvard, Low Memorial Library at Columbia, both monuments funded by addiction half a world away. The pattern is precise: smuggle opium, earn a fortune, return home, rebrand as philanthropist, erase the record. By the 1830s, American firms controlled around 10% of all opium flowing into China. Thousands of chests each year, each chest 140 pounds, each voyage a fortune, each family untouchable. And while the ships grew faster, the Chinese people grew weaker. By the 1830s, more than 10 million Chinese were addicted. Silver drained from the economy. Families shattered. An empire humiliated. China tried to stop it. Commissioner Lin Zexu confiscated and destroyed 1,000 tons of opium in 1839. Britain answered with war, the First Opium War, then the Second. China lost both, forced to open ports, pay reparations, and cede Hong Kong. And through it all, American traders thrived. When British ships were blockaded, Americans filled the gap. Profits soared. While China bled, America built. The mansions of New England rose from Chinese misery. Universities expanded with money from narcotics. The fortunes that shaped America were made from another nation's ruin. And then when the profits were secure and the wealth established, the same elite families turned to moral reform. In the early 1900s, America led the global push for drug prohibition, the Hague Convention of 1912, the Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914. The irony is almost unbearable. The descendants of smugglers became the architects of moral law. The families that sold addiction now outlawed it. By then, the history was already being buried. In the Roosevelt archives, Warren Delano's career is described as trade with China. The Astors are remembered as hoteliers and philanthropists, the Forbes family as publishers. Yale celebrates its benefactors omitting their business. Harvard honors the Cabots without a word about their trade. The whitewashing was deliberate. Textbooks omitted it. Museums softened it. Foundations controlled the story. But the records remain. The shipping logs, the ledgers, the letters, the names of the ships, the ports, the cargo all still exist. They tell a story not of conspiracy, but of continuity. The scale is staggering. Between 1800 and 1860, American firms made between $50 and $100 million from opium, the equivalent of up to $3 billion today. This was not smuggling in shadows. It was business conducted openly by the most respectable men in America. To understand the scale, imagine this. If modern billionaires made their fortunes flooding another nation with fentanyl, destroying generations, then used the profits to build universities and fund politics, and 2 centuries later, their descendants ran those same institutions. That is not imagination. That is history. In China, the memory endures. They call it the century of humiliation, the time when foreign powers poisoned their nation for profit. Every student learns it. Every citizen remembers. In America, we do not. We built our libraries with the profits and erased the source. We celebrate the philanthropists and forget the dealers. We remember their generosity but not their trade. And yet history remembers. It always does. Because truth doesn't vanish, it waits. In archives, in letters, in the quiet corners of museums, it waits for someone to ask. The Delanos, the Astors, the Forbes, the Perkins, the Russells, the Cabots, the Lows. They built America's pillars on another nation's pain. Their names still decorate the facades of universities' libraries and banks, and their silence has lasted for 200 years. If this changed how you see history, subscribe. Because every empire hides its beginning, and every truth, no matter how long buried, eventually rises to the surface.